Welcome back to It's Okay Not to Be Okay, edition like 15 or 16 or so, which is really fun to think about that we have like 15 or
Amazing.
16 conversations of like really amazing people and a really interesting moment in time because when we started this, we weren't back in school yet. And young people
Right.
who might be watching this couldn't even get the COVID vaccine yet. And so it's interesting that we've come this far. And so reintroducing kind of where we're at. Will you, Andrew, briefly reintroduce yourself for anybody that didn't watch the first episodes and then tell us
Sure.
about how your life has changed since the last time we talked briefly. And then I'm sure the questions I have will flow more into that, but
Yeah.
it's a synopsis of April, whatever it was, to June 3rd, 2021.
Yeah. I cannot believe it's June 3rd.
I know.
Yeah, my name's Andrew Norlen. I graduated from San Barlow High School in 2012. Math. I went to school in Boston, in Massachusetts, at the Boston Conservatory of Music and studied musical theater and got my bachelor's of fine arts. And then I moved to New York and started pursuing my career in musical theater as a performer in 2016. And yeah, I've been in New York the whole time, but have come and gone a lot. So it still feels weird to call myself a New Yorker because I have been really blessed and very thankful to have worked a lot since I graduated from school, which is a blessing, but also is a hard thing to sort of come back to the city every time and reinvent yourself. So that's a challenge every time, but it is definitely a very like transient lifestyle that you have to have a thick skin for and be okay with things constantly changing, and you kind of sign up for the uneasiness. So it's not for the faint of heart, but I can't imagine doing anything else. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Uh, since the last time we talked, I'm trying to think. Every time we've had these talks, I've already been in this apartment, right? I think so. Yeah. Since last time we talked, I now have a day job and am getting by much better financially. So I feel a lot more settled in that respect, which has been great. Um, I'm working at a gym at Equinox in Hudson Yards, which is a beautiful place in the city, right on the river, looking at the Hudson. And I work on the pool on the outdoor terrace for the summer. So it's like it's not a bad gig to have the free gym membership and to be able to like end the day every day like watching the sunset is pretty awesome. So that has been a huge blessing since the last time we talked. And what else? I mean, well, by the time that this is like posted on YouTube, I mean, I guess you're kind of the first people I'm telling this to publicly, besides sort of telling friends. But by the time this is the biggest thing that's happened since the last time we talked is that the theater industry wide book that I created that's coming out in the fall is got picked up by a publisher.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, that will be coming out. We're going to be announcing the date soon. And so that is like, I'm still in disbelief, and that is like a big step, and huge, for the book and for, my journey towards, publishing my own works and stuff, but one thing at a time. And, but yeah, it's really exciting, but, yeah, just trying to chip away at that slowly. And so, yeah, that's kind of the biggest things that have happened since the last time we talked.
Um, Congratulations again. That's super,
Thanks.
super exciting. And I mean, yeah, there's worse places to spend your days than outside at a pool in
Yeah,
the summertime.
truly.
So you could be, yeah, it could be any number of inside jobs.
Yes.
So yeah, let's see. So my next question, you kind of touched on it some, but like, what has it been like for you to quote reopen in this transition? Like, how would you describe that to someone maybe who 5 years from now has no context for like COVID?
Um, well, like just like what I've been doing with work, it was really alarming because New York has really been, in my opinion, because I've been here for a little bit of it and then was back in Oregon for most of it, um, has really been kind of has set the bar really high in terms of the way that that the state and that the government has reacted to the virus. I think it's really admirable. I think they had a lot of things stacked against them because New York City is not an easy thing to deal with in a pandemic. We literally like breathe and sweat on top of each other on the subway, and it's not It's exactly what you would imagine it is, and which is why the numbers were so horrible here at the beginning. But the fact that we're at, I think it's 1% positivity rate right now, which is absolutely incredible for New York State and New York City. The fact that we're at 1%, and it just really goes to show, like, in my opinion, like what happens when you don't make it about yourself. And sort of think about your neighbor. I mean, like, example, most people, I think we're almost to 60 or 70% vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and that's like from, like, I think ages 14 and up, or a little bit lower. I think it's 12 and up actually. Um, uh, it is still expected, and everybody is doing it. Is expected to wear their mask when we're on the subway still. And what's really amazing is, like, to see just like the New York vitality and the spirit that people. I guarantee most people that are on the subway car with me are fully vaccinated with both shots. But it's a solidarity thing. It's a we're wearing this to show respect and kindness to someone, because you don't have. I'm not going to ask every single person I walk down the street and see if they've been vaccinated or not. It's just depending on what space you're in. It's about having awareness. And but I mean, all of that said, it is very it's really overwhelming. As a society, we've gotten used to something new, and adapting back to what we knew before is very hard. We've created, people say, science says it takes 27 times to make something a habit, and, like, we've been doing it for a year. And so what is that day going to be like when we don't have to wear it anywhere anymore, and I'm going to, like, grab the thing where my masks are hanging outside my room, but it'll be a hat instead now? Like, that's going to be weird. And but yeah, I just think, like, example of my own life at Equinox, where I'm working at the gym. When the mask mandate was lifted here in New York, it's hard because it very much felt like a light switch, which is very scary because we've been so used to something. So on the 18th, in the gym, all of us working there were wearing masks, and everyone inside the gym working out was wearing masks. The only time that you were allowed to take it off, excuse me, was at the pool where I was at. And I had to wear a mask the whole time on the pool deck because I'm going back and forth and concierging people to their chairs, whatever. But if they're in the pool or if they're at their chair, they can have their mask off. But that was it. That was on the 18th. And then on the 19th, the mask mandate ended everywhere except the subways and public transportation. And it was very alarming because, like, I worked that day, and then I worked out that day, and it was literally nothing. Like, suddenly no one was wearing a mask. And for all of that to happen in one day is very, very confronting to have been used to something. And I mean, there's a part of it that was very exciting to, like, see people's smiles that I've been working with. I didn't know we had a whole conversation about this. Like, we didn't know what everybody's bottom of their face looked like, because I was new to working there, and I'm like, I don't know what my colleagues' faces look like. It's so strange, but that's the world that we've adapted to. And so it's been really bizarre. It's been super bizarre to adapt to that, but also it's exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking. And I think it's about being cautious. Like, we have a group text with all of us that work there, the staff, and, like, there was a few people that were like, hey, like, no judgment of what everybody's going to do tomorrow, but just so you know, like, what I'm comfortable with, because I still haven't gotten my second vaccine yet, like, I'm going to still be wearing a mask at work. And it's just like, I wish we didn't live. I mean, it sounds weird. We've never done the mask thing before until COVID. So I think it's kind of cool that people feel empowered enough. Like, there was no judgment. I loved that she was saying that. And I think that that's sort of segueing into whatever else we're going to talk about today. Like, I think that we all have learned a lot about ourselves, I hope, from this time. And I thought it was cool that she, in something that probably in related to anything else in a workplace would have a lot of stigma around it, the fact that she felt empowered to be like, and wanted to make sure she said, hey, like, I'm not judging any of you for not wearing your mask tomorrow. Like, your story is your story, but just so you know, I want to be transparent about why I'm still wearing mine, so you feel safe and I feel safe. I'm like, we need to be able to have conversations like that and open dialogue a little bit more than I think, which I think is kind of a gift that we've been given from this time.
I hope that many more people have learned that gift than knew it before. I have a lot of hope, and it's what keeps me going. Let's see. I want to talk about transition and closing, but I also have some personal questions that came up after last time.
Yeah.
If you're open to those.
Of course.
Okay, so let's see. And I also realized it is now June, which is Pride Month. So that's kind
Yes.
of an exciting thing that some of these questions came with. So the first one that I have is similar to something we asked one of our speakers last week. What would you dream could exist for queer youth in the 2021 and 2022 school year to, I guess just be best supportive and make high school a place in the world, a place that can let more people be themselves? So just
Yeah.
a small question.
um no, that's super important, and that is a very loaded question. That's hard.
If you want to narrow it down a little bit, we've had several students who have said like, well, I really liked listening to him or some of the other speakers, and I wonder what he would do if he could come back to high school and offer something to me. So that's very cool.
I think it's more the thing about like being a proud and out gay man, and it's hard to say that because sometimes I don't feel like that on a daily basis, and that's a very interesting thing and dichotomy with Pride Month in general and my own story as a queer person. But the first thing that pops into my mind when you just said that is, if I could go back, I think, um, kind of what I've talked about in previous conversations with you guys is, uh, I am a very, very type A, very controlling, not necessarily in a negative way, but it is both. It is the double-edged sword of my life for sure. Um, uh, and I'm a workhorse. Where am I going with this? Uh, I think I would go back and, kind of honestly, the mantra of like these talks are called, like it's okay to not be okay. I think I would go back and either tell any youth, or any person that don't be afraid to ask for help. I think everything, and that goes for literally everything. As dark, and if you are having, uh, if you are experiencing depression, excuse me, or suicidal thoughts, or any range of discomfort, or whatever it is that you're going through in your high school experience, it is so important to me, and sort of what I feel like I'm finding through my own writing and through sort of what I want to do with my life, as a human to other and for other humans, is remind youth that, and remind queer youth specifically, is to sort of get rid of this stigma. Number one, that we need to have it all together, and number two, especially for guys, um, that there's no shame in asking people for help. And that goes for anything in life. It can be as simple as like the pride you feel of why you're not raising your hand to like own up to the fact that like you're literally in this place to learn, and the fear that I had of raising my hand to ask a question because of my fear of being judged by my peers, or what that would mean of not being the smartest person in the room. And I've never been the smartest person in the room, and I think I'm finally at a place in my life where I'm okay with that, and I kind of love that. Like I want to surround myself with I want to surround myself with people that are pushing me, with people that are smarter than me, with people that are holding me to account of my own goals, so that I am never complicit, so that I'm constantly growing and changing. Um, I think that, I mean, I could imagine if I was a teenager right now today, I would imagine that if I was them, I would probably get so tired of people older than me constantly talking about how obsessed they are with social media. And here's what I have to say about that. So, we talked about this, maybe we talked about this a little bit in one of my last conversations, I don't remember. I talk about this all the time. Um, as a millennial, we were the last generation to grow up with the evolution of technology. I remember having, before there was an iPod Nano, before all of that, I remember having the very, very end of cassettes and like being so excited about CDs, but all these things happen very fast, and like it's incredible to see science and technology evolve. However, um, I talk to my sister about this all the time with her own kids that she's raising now. Like there is, I don't know what it feels like to be a teenager right now where all you have ever known is technology. All you have ever known is cell phones and iPads and being inundated with it. Now, what's hard for my generation is I think sometimes millennials, we feel, maybe I'm going to sound like old and annoying saying this, but I think I was talking to a friend about this the other night at dinner. I think sometimes millennials feel like this like bridge between all of the generations above us and everyone below us, because we were the only generation that experienced this massive, that really ran the gamut of like an insane amount of growth in technology from when I was like in 6th grade to when I was a senior in college. And was an amazing thing to watch, but it also taught us something, whereas the generation that is in high school now was born into something and it's never been different. And so I think that, well, that is a gift, because there are things that older generations above, like my grandparents and my parents, don't understand, and just like brush things off of like what an influencer is, and like, oh, I don't want to hear about TikTok and blah 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 blah. But as a person that doesn't have a TikTok, and as a person that like gets frustrated by social media, but also realizes what it does and how it can help people, um, being that bridge is a really really hard place to be. But something I admire but also have respect for of teenagers right now is I can only imagine how annoying it must be, because I didn't experience that, how annoying it must be to constantly hear everyone that's older than you that hasn't often taken the time to get to know what that technology is and why it's important to them. However, what I will say, and why I brought this up, is because, and there's a lot of it reminds me of like the musical Dear Evan Hansen, and like there's a lot of art that has been created to sort of comment on what this generation that's been so technologically driven, and I include myself as a millennial in that, has gone through, and how we've evolved, but also how hurtful it can be, and how important it is to have boundaries, and how important it is to understand what is real and authentic and what is curated and filtered, and like filtered and curated, and all those words of what you're doing to change yourself is a giant metaphor for like what it can slowly do to your soul. And I'm saying that not out of judgment of that other people are doing that. I'm saying that because I have done that. It is still a constant battle of being like, how do I, this feeling we have as young people of being like, how do I remain relevant? And I say that in big air quotes, because you have to have enough, I think, to me, you have to like enter that world of forced fake, and it isn't fake, because I've had beautiful conversations with people like through a direct message or whatever, and I shouldn't discount it. That it is a gift that we're able to stay so connected in the world. That is a very cool thing. But bringing this back around to what your question was, I think that I would want to remind someone, to never forget like the authenticity and that feeling, coming back to what we've talked about in previous conversations, of true authentic joy happening viscerally inside of your body. To me, number one always comes from connection, human connection, face to face, in person, feeling the other person's energy and endorphins. And there will never be anything else like that. And it's finite, it's transient, it's in the moment, it's done. And number one, that's why I love performing in live theater so much. Tangent. But yeah, I think that, and then sort of segueing that back to what you said about like pride, this month is really, this month is hard for me, because I am a person, I am a queer but cisgendered white gay man. I, in this conversation, in this world of celebrating Pride in the month of June, I have been afforded a lot of privilege in my life, and now, granted, that doesn't discount, and this we could talk about this for hours and hours, but that doesn't discount like the hardships of the things that I've been through. But it is important for me to be aware of that, have that awareness, and then be the voice and amplifier and megaphone of more marginalized voices than mine, whether that be the BIPOC community, trans brothers and sisters, everyone in the queer community. It is so that the intersectionality of that is so much more complex. And this also is, I hope that this is a Pride Month this year, coming off of the coattails, excuse me, of, oh my gosh, so much seltzer water. I've had so much seltzer today, I'm losing my mind. LaCroix. Uh, I think coming off of the coattails of this year, I really, really hope that we can be having really, really transparent conversations as a people and as humanity surrounding this conversation of the queer community during this month. Because I will be honest with you, it's really hard. I think the term is called like rainbow washing, and I don't really need to explain that. I think everyone knows what that means the moment I say it. It's big corporations buying into the fact of being a part of this movement for 30 days, and then the moment that it's over, it's about normalizing the conversation of, for people that have privilege, including myself, inside of the queer community, and my privilege inside the queer community, remembering why Pride exists, remembering that this began with riots in the streets at Stonewall here in New York City as a protest against what was happening to Black trans women and men in the queer community. And I think that no matter how many times you walk into a Target or H&M or these stores or the Disney store, which I think is a beautiful thing, but like, okay, cool that you're doing that, but let's have like a gay character in a cartoon before you just do that and slap a rainbow on it and say that you're an ally. That's a very different conversation. And it's important. I think that we're in a place now as a society where people are just going to say how they're feeling. And I'm excited about that, but it also is scary, and it's nerve-wracking, because I think people this year, and I hope that people can enter into those conversations with grace for each other, and also listening to learn something new, and to listen to accept, instead of listening to debate, or listening to have a rebuttal or an answer, or a justification as to why you are turned off by something. I think that, if anything, it's great that this year has opened up these conversations and allowed all of us a space into being more vocal about and transparent with each other and anyone about what it is we're struggling with. But I think an important conversation, especially after all of the insane and incredible amounts of work and effort and activism that the BIPOC community has been doing over the last year, and way before the George Floyd movement that happened after his horrific death. I think that this year, I hope, will be a year where we are focusing on the why instead of only the celebration. Because that's a reminder I have to remind myself of why I have the privileges I do, and that it isn't just a time and a month to, myself included, slap a rainbow on everything and just like talk about me. It needs to be a reminder of, why are we doing this? Why are we celebrating this? And also like a forward thinking progression of like, what do we need to do as a people and humanity and as a society and as a country to change this narrative, so that we can eventually get to a place where a high school student isn't afraid to come out. And eventually, I hope in my lifetime, we're not having to constantly ask somebody what their coming out story is. It's just their story. And that, like, thinking about that gives me goosebumps, because I hope I get to see that day in my lifetime. That is a very massive ask and a hard thing to think about. But yeah, that was like a 20-minute answer. I'm so sorry.
No need to apologize. I didn't come up with lots of questions because I like the way that you share what you need to share. I also got goosebumps when you said that, because I think of several friends that have said similar things about how things are way better even than when they were in high school 10 years ago, and that they can get married and walk around with their partner now.
Right.
Cases. And both of those things are big steps that are only true in our lifetime for a lot of people.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, I wanted to comment on you. We're talking about social media, which is a big thing that I think, I mean, I even find myself judgmental sometimes, or, well, actually, no, that is the correct word, because I don't understand why people can't just put their phones down. But I think that's because we were raised in a time in which you would pass notes in class, and then you would read the handwritten note. And then if you got the note at the end of the day, you had to wait maybe 24 hours to continue the conversation, unless you were going to call on the corded phone and hope that your sibling or parent didn't pick it up, and you had to use your voice. Like, communication has changed completely, but we haven't taught people what healthy communication looks like anymore.
Boom.
And
there it is.
I've been doing a lot of work around like substance use in teens, and how for most teens it's a coping strategy, not necessarily a desire to be intoxicated. Those are connected. But I think the teenage brain hasn't exactly started evolving any faster. So our ability to make judgments and make decisions isn't going any faster. But now if I say something to you, you have to respond right now. Or if we're on certain apps, like, people feel the obligation to respond, and there is no processing time. I think in general, but especially in communication, we don't give people the space to process. And I think we're also, we're learning a lot more about like neurodiversity and how many people need more processing time. Even, they did when we were young, but they definitely do now. And so where I was going with that was something around just, I think social media over the last year, for some teens I've talked to, especially teens who don't identify as being supported by their friends or family in any number of category, it's allowed them to find community. And so I think it's important that we always honor that like, young people are creative and they find what they need, but we don't necessarily often recognize that. So let's see. Oh, a further question from what I asked. Are there things that if you were talking to, say, an adult who was making, how do I put this? An adult that was making policies or resources available for teens in school, what things would you think could be added to make teens feel safer emotionally in general? Not necessarily just like non-binary or queer youth, but like, what are things that you think could make teens that don't feel safe at school emotionally feel safer?
I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but the first thing that popped into my mind is I always remember, and I don't know if this is still the same way, but I always remember just being I sort of stayed in my lane in high school, and I sort of did the thing that I said, okay, this is the box I'm supposed to be in. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I feel like no matter how many times I was told about resources that were available, until, and I think this is a picture of anything in life, until I saw someone that I could relate to being personally helped by said thing, it didn't even cross my mind that like that avenue of counseling at school, that extracurricular activity after school, that gay straight alliance thing, which is not something that was there when I was there, but any of those resources, if you will, until I especially think that is the case when your brain is still developing in high school. I know for myself that like I stayed on my track because I admired the people that were doing that, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do when I'm a freshman. When I was 8th grader and hearing about things in the theater community or the drama department at Barlow, and like where I saw myself fitting. Like, we see where our track is or what we want, where the box we're supposed to do, and we think we need to do everything to stay on that thing because that's going to give us control and keep us safe. And so to answer your question, I think that it's hard, and that's why I'm saying I don't know if it's an answer, is it's really, really multifaceted. Of, I think what needs to be thought about is a more well-rounded, it's about representation for every kind of person. And then when you're saying, hey, we have this resource, it's about being transparent about how it has helped people. And I don't want to, we are all, as human beings, we don't want to make ourselves uncomfortable until we see the potential of what we can get from it. Like, that is like why we are afraid of risk and want to stay on the path of what gives us control. That's just the human condition. So I think that I would imagine it's really frustrating sometimes as an educator or someone that's trying to give students an outlet and give these resources, and being like, okay, so why is nobody biting at this? But for myself, I know that like I don't want to join a club. I don't want to do an after school activity. All of these things in my head are time. And you don't want to give your time, whether that be immediate or long term, and especially it's all tied in back to what we were talking about before. Like social media and what this generation has stacked up against them is that everything is related to immediate satisfaction, myself included. And that's a hard battle every day. So it's about presenting, to me, to educators and to people creating curriculum or resources. To me, I would say it is all about accessibility, access, and I want it to be another A word, but it probably won't be. Accessibility, access, and representation. It needs to be easy for me to connect with whatever this resource is. I already forgot the second A word I said. Accessibility. Oh my God. What did I say?
Access.
Access. Thank you. Geez. And access, meaning, I guess access, maybe it's just those two words. Access is like representation. I need to be able, I want to see myself in the thing that I'm taking a risk on or that I'm giving my time to. And I think that's just how all of us are with anything. Like it's the same, like, it's the same reason that there's like commercials exist on TV. That's a really weird example, but like, you're not going to switch and like start using like that new detergent when you've done one thing the whole way of washing laundry your whole life until like you see that it's worked for someone else. Like that's why we write reviews. That's why people want to know the reviews on a book before they buy it or a product on Amazon. So it's like, I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but I think that in that time of life when you're growing and changing constantly, I think it's really scary to, number one, know yourself enough yet, and you don't know yourself enough yet to be like, this is what I need. And also there's so much there is a lot of stigma surrounding like just going and deciding to do something without the people that you're going to do it with, or your group of friends, or just like not even being a leader about it, but just like owning, I'm going to do that for myself, which comes back to what you said before of like, I think that like this idea of being driven and having ambition to just be self-motivated to seek out things that are going to give you self-confidence and like be healthy within yourself before any other interactions, I think comes back to like teaching us how to communicate and teaching young people how to communicate. And that's something that I fail at every day. And I think it's really, really, I think it's really important to be open about communication, to talk about what we need as people, and that what each of us needs and how other friends and family and loved ones communicate with us, everyone's way they need and their boundaries they need are different. And so we have to talk about that so you know how to navigate that with all the people in your life. And so I think that comes back to, if there's something that is a resource, you want to know that you're going to be safe before you even take a risk on that resource.
Yeah, no, that answers the question. I think the theme of representation is the theme. Like, young people need to see other people that they can relate to.
Right.
And that offer them things that, like, the things that maybe I didn't need, I offer, and I say, this is why I'm offering this,
right.
rather than making an assumption.
Right.
Which just takes vulnerability on the part of us adults.
Right.
Which we're not good at because, we weren't taught how to do this. So we're figuring it out and teaching it. But I think we owe it to teenagers that have been through a pandemic to give them a better future. Let's see.
Agree.
I'm going to skip some of my questions, but I'll just ask this one. It's a brief question, and then I'll skip. It was, thinking back to yourself in high school, were there things the school or adults around you could have done to help you feel more safe as you were discovering yourself? In any number of categories. You've kind of touched on that, but I didn't ask it that personally.
Yeah, I think back to what we just were talking about. I think truly the simple short answer is, I always wonder, like, what would my high school experience have been like if I would have had a queer teacher that was out themselves unapologetically. And now, granted, that's a different conversation because, actually, it's really not, because I think I was gonna say it's a different conversation because we like don't know like what happens in someone's personal life, but like that being said, like all teachers have pictures of their kids or their spouses on their desks, and I think that if there was a queer teacher that was at my school, I had no idea, and they were not allowed in the world we lived in then to show that. And so I think it comes back to at the beginning of the pandemic, I went through my yearbooks and I counted and realized that in my graduating class of like 460 people, there were there were three people. There were three Black students in my class. Three or four. It was under five, and I thought about those people. I was very close to one of them in choir, and I thought to myself, if that is the experience that I had as a queer person in the closet through all of high school, just with my head down, but with my head up in the places where I felt seen, but still wasn't being 100% me always. Um, how did, because I mean, granted, I didn't have a queer person, but I was surrounded by male white teachers, so there was that element that I saw myself in the as all we want is someone to inspire us. All we want as a young person is to see ourselves older. Period. That's what representation is. And I can't imagine what that must have been like as a person of color in our student body to not see themselves anywhere in the halls and how they got through a day. That blows my mind. And that is the same experience. I mean, there were many queer teachers in my college years, but there was not a single person of color that was in my college in Boston, in a college town. Like, and that's things that my college is doing that work now too. And those things have been called out, and that's what this year has been. But yeah, I mean, I think I always wonder like what my experience in high school would have been like if I would have seen myself in more places.
Thanks. Let's see. So circling back to the idea of transition, closure, things like that. So maybe this is just my experience, but I think a lot of us are experiencing this like excitement of reopening. You get to be out by the pool all the time. You can see people's smiles. Like there's a lot of really cool things happening. But for a lot of us, there's been a lot of things that have been good about this time away in some ways. And so I personally know I'm feeling this sense of like grieving the change. Like I'm very excited, but I'm also grieving that like this season is over. And there's a lot of things I enjoyed about it that I cannot do. Like it's just, I cannot do. I love my job, and my job is in person. And so the idea of the creative things I could do working from home are done, at least for now in life. So is there anything that you are grieving in the transition, and what is that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, my first my first answer, the first thing that comes to mind is I was at home with my family for almost a year. And so I am grieving when I moved back to the city. My roommate often comes back and forth and will stay at his girlfriend's apartment. And so they're like, it was a huge time of transition to go from, I've only ever known New York City as living with myself plus 3 to 4 other roommates in big apartments. And then COVID happened. Then I spent all of my time. I am such a people person. I love like debriefing with whoever's around me at the end of their day about our days and just like letting things out in that way. I am such an extrovert. I get my energy to be able to cope with being alone by being with people, and connection. And so it felt like I am grieving, finishing my night every single night surrounded by my family. So yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. That was a huge transition. And I live in a city that is full of life, and a city where people say this all the time, like, sure, it's like the city that never sleeps. I totally agree with that. But it is so full of people, and yet there is nowhere in the world where I have ever had more lonely moments in my life than here. And I think that is because the moment that you become one of many, everyone just goes into survival mode and you kind of get lost. And it's just, that's sort of like a picture of why it is even more vital when you're in those circumstances to have awareness of that, and to have boundaries, but also to set yourself up for success, to create an environment for yourself where you have things to look forward to, where you have things to pull you out of those places in terms of mental health where you know you might go to. And so that's what I've tried to do. That's why I try to set up times to go have a drink or have dinner with a friend, or I have to set myself up for success with those moments, so I have something to look forward to. But also, that being said, it's an intersection of two things. Like, that has also been this realization for me of being like, okay, Andrew, that is a crutch, and you have gotten way too used to always being surrounded by people right before you go to bed. So what is that teaching you about your life? And this, try to think of, and I think that's kind of like a COVID mentality. I kind of got back to the city. At first, I distracted myself with decorating my apartment and doing a bunch of stuff. But then I had to sit with my thoughts and be like, okay, when there's like 2, 3, 4 nights where I spend alone in the apartment, I'm like, well, I need to be processing this and think about, right now, I need to be like, why is it I am so uncomfortable with being alone, with sitting with myself and sitting with my thoughts? And what is it that I'm running away from? Because those are those moments where I just have to pause and breathe, close my eyes, and be like, okay, I have a roof over my head. I have a family that loves me. My body is healthy, and I had dinner tonight, and I am not broke. And it's those reminders where, when my anxiety becomes very, very, very overwhelming, because it's just the games we all play as human beings, like just the what if game of there's so much I'm missing at home, or like maybe I made the wrong decision and came back to New York too soon, and just that feeling of loneliness it's all about mindset, and I need to that's really important to me, and I talk about that all the time. Like, I have to stop myself and sort of recalibrate the gears inside of me and my heart and my brain, and like get them back to the same wavelength, but also realize when insecurity is talking, and realize the difference between being lonely and then a coping mechanism, because I think that they are very different. I think when I am sad, I need to think about, am I sad because I haven't seen friends and haven't connected with people in a really long time? Or am I sad because I am reaching out to friends and wanting to connect with a bunch of people to avoid something bigger within myself? That is more often than not it, which I avoid with busying myself. And I want to be better, and that's something I'm working on in my own life always, is why am I trying to fill every moment of the day, and what is it I'm trying to run away from when I am feeling that anxiety of I'm not getting something done, or what am I doing creatively, or something as simple as, Andrew, just sit with yourself. You don't need to watch a Netflix show. You don't need to ask a friend to go out to dinner. What do you like? Just sit with my own thoughts, because that is a really hard thing for us to give ourselves as people permission to do, because we're scared of what we're going to learn.
No, I know I have learned exactly what's happening when I find myself cleaning the bathroom floor behind the toilet, like the parts of your house that you don't clean, that you avoid. When I've decided that's what I'm doing, it's because I've decided I'm not doing something else.
Right.
And so I think there's just that step of learning those things about ourselves is really big. And I think I've heard you say this before, we have to give ourselves grace. Like, sometimes, you do need to distract yourself because it's a pandemic. But maybe in 2022, when it's not, if you're doing it every night of the week, it's important to pay attention to.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, another thing that you mentioned, like, speaking of New York City, you said, like, there's lots of people, but when you're out there, it's like survival mode, just not get lost in the crowd, which is something that many teenagers experience at school in the hallways.
Yeah.
And until this fall, teenagers really have not, for over a year. Like, for example, sophomores will experience crowded hallways for the first time in high school, their sophomore year of high school, or some of the juniors, even junior year. So what might you say someone should ask themselves or do when they're like, I really know myself now. I've learned about myself in the last year and a half. I express myself differently. Maybe they've connected to an online community and they feel in more places than ever safely being themselves. Whether that be like they found video game friends or something else. But then they're going to be plopped back into this high school environment in real life with different people.
Right.
What advice would you give to them to keep that joy that they found in that non-school community while being in the school community?
Yeah.
Because I think that there's a healthy, again, back to social media, there's a healthy side of like you can be yourself in these online spaces.
Yeah.
But we also have to exist in the
like
hallways of high school.
Right. That's an amazing question, and I think it goes like perfectly in tandem with the whole theme of transitions, obviously, because that's what it's about. But I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, and I only know my own experience, so that's what I'm going to talk about. The thing that pops into my head is setting yourself up with something to look forward to. That is how I get through everything. And that can be big or small things. And what I mean by that is, I'm trying to think. I mean, the first thing I can think of, like an example in my own life, and then I'm going to tie it back into of maybe how a high schooler could approach it, is like with what I do in my career. It is very, I have transitions constantly. And my life is this never-ending ebb and flow of starting a new contract. If I go away to a new place, you meet this brand new people, that become your family very quickly, because if they don't, then you're gonna have a weird vibe on stage. And I have crazy stories from all of those experiences, but that's what the nature of the business is, which is why people love it. But also it's really hard. You get close to people. When I did the Kinky Boots tour, it was so hard. I lived with these people 24/7 for 8 months. And then how do you come out of that transition when these people have become your family, and when people are venting to each other about like what's going on back at home in your home lives? Like, we are sitting there doing our makeup together every night, and there's such a community and a tribe that's created. And back to what you were saying, if for that teenager that has felt like they've thrived in this setting in COVID, maybe they are more of an introvert and they've been able to find themselves in those communities like you alluded to. I think that for me, what helps me is setting myself up with something to look, like I said, to look forward to. So maybe for a teen that is anxious, like you said, about being in the hallways, or is anxious about the community that they've found doesn't actually go to school with them. Maybe it's carving out space, and at the beginning of every week on Sunday, you make a plan, because your life is going to change and now you're in person. So you're not going to have the opportunities of what you've created for a year, this new normal you created during this pandemic, of when you play that video game with that person, when you guys chat, when you watch that person's Instagram live. All that stuff's going to change. Your timetable of life is going to change, especially this fall. It's going to be very confronting. So maybe it's taking time every Sunday and setting and writing it down. I really am a firm believer in like putting pen to paper and like having something literally physically to see and to look forward to. There is something that's so massive about that, because it when you put it in writing, it feels official, and then you're using all of your senses. I can see it. If it's something, when I make a note into my phone, that's a little different, but I like my Australian man responds back to me and reads it back. But putting pen to paper and being intentional about the time that you're carving out for yourself. And that's a bigger conversation for all people. I mean, teenagers, I'm here to tell you that like your parents are terrible at doing that. At putting pen to paper, and I'm bad at doing that. My mom and dad are bad at doing that. Putting pen to paper and saying, this is my time for myself, because I'm going to look forward to connecting with that person. It doesn't go to my school, but it's going to be an avenue and a chance for me to reach out to them, for us both to vent. So maybe that's on Wednesday, of like right in the middle of your week, what's been hard, what assignments you've gotten that are hard and scary, and that like push to give each other encouragement to get through the rest of the week, and then get to Sunday again and check back in with them. That's what community is. That's what following through and following up with people, and being accountable to each other, but number one, to yourself, because there's an element of that the other person is going to look forward to connecting with you. And that doesn't have to be this person you've connected through with video games. It can literally be anything. And maybe it's not necessarily people, but whatever it is, like you said, that maybe you're having a hard time grieving the loss of, because now that you're back in person, your schedule and your time has drastically shifted from the way school functioned when it was all on a computer at your house and you had a lot more free time where there isn't all this travel time, or you're not on the bus. Like you've found new ways to fill your time, and you're like, oh, I don't want to let go of these things that have become normal to me and also have become kind of a lifeline, because I think all of us have found those things. So finding the marriage between how can I bring that in a new way into this new, back to a new normal, and building back to a better normal. Because I think that there are a lot of, we've lost a lot of people and a lot of things, and we've learned a lot. But I think also everyone, I don't know how anybody could have ended this year without gaining something or learning something about themselves, good, bad, or ugly. But it's always about mindset. It's about how are you going to wake up the next day and think about that thing that triggers you in your life, that thing that you lost, that person, that friendship that you had to let go of. How are you going to take what you learned, good, bad, or ugly, from that? Because I think there's always a stigma around that of being like, I don't want to learn something from this. I just want to like let that be a bad memory. But maybe you're supposed to learn that bad memory is supposed to teach you something else. And everything, I'm not saying it all has to be positive, but it's about your mindset and about being like, why did that happen? And what am I supposed to continue growing as me today? And sometimes the answer won't come, but it's about having that internal dialogue with yourself and having the awareness and working every day at having more awareness, so that eventually the answer does come. And then you get to have that beautiful cathartic moment where you're like, oh, that's what that relationship taught me. And it's a balance. It's really, really hard. It's about letting those things pass through you, but then recognizing, and that's a skill that I'm not amazing at, but that I've learned, I think, through all of my 20s. Like, you have to let things, and I'm laughing at myself thinking that I like just let things pass through me, because I like take everything personally, and that's something I work on every day. But I think it's really important to be like, okay, why am I focusing so much on this? Why is it making me so anxious? And then saying like, is this something I can actually solve today in my day? Or is that a bigger thing that it's going to take a lot more time? Like, give yourself that grace, give yourself the gift of time, and just let it teach you the lesson how it is supposed to teach it to you in its timeline, not in your own.
That's, yes, all of that. I don't even remember what the question is, but that answered it. Does anybody else who's here have questions they want to ask?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the city where you live. What is your favorite place to go in New York? Where do you enjoy hanging out?
Being an Oregonian, my favorite place to go is to just either, I live really, really close to the Hudson River, so to just like walk the one avenue out my door to the right, to just to nature, like to anything that reminds me that that like life is still happening beyond the concrete jungle. And like my old apartment, I used to live very, very close to Central Park, so that was like a beautiful, I would get coffee in the mornings and I would go and walk there, and it's just and that's hard because that's man-made, and like I try to get myself as much as I can, but it also, like, even as I'm answering you saying that, like, it kind of you asked me that and it kind of made me sad inside, because I think that I haven't given myself enough permission since I got back from Oregon while I've been here. So I'm actually really, thank you for asking me that, because I want to be better and more intentional about carving out those times for myself, just like the advice that I just gave, of doing the things that remind me that the world is bigger than I am, that's bigger than me, that's bigger than my dream, that's bigger than why I'm in New York. Because I think I've talked about this before in past conversations. New York is a place full of, I have to call it what it is. New York is a very, very selfish place. because you cannot survive here if you are not thinking about yourself. And that is a beautiful thing, but it is also a really, really can be, if you let it be, a very negative thing, which is why it's a very lonely place sometimes. But you have to have the awareness of feeling empowered, like I said before, surrounding yourself with people that encourage you, that are encouraging your dreams along your path, but that you're willing to encourage other people along their dreams on their path. But the moment that you get lost, that's why the city is so lonely, but also so inspiring, is because it's filled with this like energy and pulse of people coming here to accomplish this thing that they feel like, in not just in theater, like in everything. Like that person is here and is pursuing finance and their degree in that because that is what matters to them. And so there's like a tingly like vitality to people that is like unlike anywhere I've ever been in the world. But it's a double-edged sword, and it can be the thing that breaks you. It can be the thing that tells you to leave the city. But also the beautiful thing about this year, I think, to me, is like, I think that stigma has gone away, especially in the musical theater community. People are like championing each other of like, no, you needed to take this time. Oh, you don't want to come back to the city? You've started a family. You bought a house. Like, people are realizing what really, really matters to them, and then letting go of the judgment of, oh, actually, I'm not done with my city dream yet. Oh, actually, I started this family during COVID and I'm good. I'm good with the business. I think there's so much, at least in my industry, there's so much stigma around like, oh, you left New York. Yeah, couldn't hack it. Like that sort of mentality. And I would venture to say that's probably in every business inside of the city, of that stigma of like what the city does to you. It feels like it's its own person that you're like in this battle with every day. But I love that you asked me that, because I think that's something I need to be more intentional about, because it's the thing that grounds me. I am such a water boy, so I just go down to the Hudson and just like look at the vastness of that to remind myself and bring myself back to home, to the Columbia River, to the Pacific Northwest, and looking across to New Jersey and seeing these like beautiful rolling hills in the area that I'm in. And like, that's the things where you have to like get your ego in check and come back to like the why. For me, it's always like, what am I bringing myself back to? Why I came to New York, and then also just like to try to like breathe fresh like water air, even though the water's kind of gross.
Yeah, I grew up in Nashville and worked at a gym in like just outside of downtown in college, and that energy feel of like everyone moving there for their dream is really, really
Right.
fun.
Right.
It's also tricky when they've decided to move elsewhere for not exciting things.
Yeah.
Because it's very emotional, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's see. With the last little bit of our time, not to make it too cheesy, but could you tell us your thoughts on like how people can best handle closure, by whatever definition you want to have of that, as we come to the end of a school year, the end of a season of time at home, or maybe as people are looking as relationships transition? Like, what are ways to heal through closure, I guess, instead of just stuff it away?
Yeah, I think that that's a really, really hard thing for any person in school in the last year. I think about people that didn't get to have their graduation in person last year in colleges or in high school across the world, and what that meant for them, because we have these, we as human beings, like I said before, like setting yourself up to look forward to something, but what that creates also is expectations. And then when expectations get broken in life, we become disappointed. And it's a vicious circle, but it doesn't have to be. And so I think with closure, that's a really hard thing. Is I'm definitely a person that is like very much wants to like wrap everything up with a bow and have everything be final, and know how it's going to end. In my own experience, in COVID, that was a really, really hard thing. I've lived with one of my best friends, Catalina. She's from New Jersey. Always in New York City. We lived together in college too, and we ended our lease and we left our apartment in the midst of COVID, and we moved out of there. And the girls that I lived with, they all moved in with their boyfriends, and so it was really hard because I was grieving the loss of not having that closure, not having this season of my life that I didn't know was going to end with this friend that I've always known being a roommate in New York City with Catalina. if I felt kind of robbed. I felt very, very affected by the fact that like, oh, I will never get to like have an ending to our time together. Like me and my parents came back in November. We moved me out into a storage unit. I came back to Oregon, and then I moved into a brand new apartment, and she is still living in New Jersey and is now in a new house with her sister and her mom. And so she has really changed and transitioned in this season of her life. And it's just been about us giving each other grace. But when those expectations were broken for me, I realized that I was like pushing her away, and I was like, we're not reaching out to her as much, and we're best friends. And that has really been an illuminating thing. And so for me in my own life this year is like, when our expectations get broken related to the closure that we seek in the ending of anything, I think the number one thing to do is to talk about it. Is to say to the people that you're afraid of losing, I'm afraid of losing you. You have to say it out loud. You have to speak truth to your experience you're experiencing inside of your head, because what I'm here to tell you and guarantee is that every single time you speak it out loud, it is never, everything is never as monumental as I make it inside of my head. Everything. And the moment that I share something, no matter how hard it is to get it out, no matter how vulnerable it is, by sharing that with another person and with another human, they get to reflect back at me that they either empathize or they can relate in some way, or they will have, more often than not, very rarely am I going to reach out to someone in a season of closure of something in my life that doesn't have something that they could relate to that subject about in my life. But all that to say, sometimes you don't have to be seeking an answer. So it's really multifaceted. Sometimes the closure that we seek is control, I think. And I think it's just really, I think it's important to be honest about your fears, speak them out loud, and then realize that by doing that, in nature, you will often not be as afraid, number one, because you've said it out loud, and number two, because you will probably, I guarantee you, find at least one, if not 10 other people when you express it that are feeling exactly the same way that you are. But we have this thing as human nature, especially as teenagers, that we convince ourselves that like we are the only person going through that. And I can't share that and open up and be vulnerable about that, because there's no way that anybody else is feeling like that. And we get so riddled with shame that we forget that there's other people around us that might not be going through the exact same experience, because they're not, because your experience is your own. That's a beautiful thing, but it's also a really hard thing. And so I think that when it comes to like the ending of school and when it comes to new beginnings, number one, like I said before, setting yourself up for success and having things to look forward to, trying to find creative outlets. And that's in tandem with the first thing, finding things to create for yourself, whether that be more time, whether that be a coffee date with a friend, whether that be something that's creative in your life that has nothing to do with the thing that you're losing or the thing that's ending or the thing that you're seeking closure from, to occupy your brain, not to distract you in an unhealthy way, but to give you purpose. Because closure, and when something's ending, it feels like the thing that might have been giving us purpose in that season. Where am I going to find my purpose anymore? What am I going to do when the summer hits? Where am I going to find my purpose when that after school club ends? When the places where I find connection and people and life, when those things end, who am I? And like that's my own experience, because that's what I have to do in my career all the time, is like I create beautiful relationships with people, and then we all go different ways, and I'm like back to like, it feels like I'm back to ground zero every time I move back to New York. And it's about always having a conversation with myself of like, okay, these people brought beauty into your life. How can you take what they've taught you and live your life with all of that? They didn't go anywhere. They're just not in front of your face every day. So it's hard. It's those, when things don't become convenient anymore, we have to do more work and we have to show up for ourselves a little bit differently.
Thank you. That feels like a really great thing to kind of wrap up on. Because, yeah, like, again, it comes back to like, you are yourself. You find your joy. You continue finding
Right.
them, you know, life is a puzzle. We're just adding new pieces all the time, or leaving
Yes.
pieces. So, yeah. Are there any parting words you'd like to have for us?
I don't think so. Just if you watch this later, please reach out and connect with me on social media. I would love to connect and hear about what you're going through and be there for you in any possible way that I can to see what you're up to and yeah, just connect beyond this conversation because that's what it's about.
And I'll just close by congratulating you again on the publisher. That's a huge deal.
Thank you.
Like, it's
Yeah, more to come.
yeah, no, that's exciting. And congrats. And